The Ambrosiana Library was opened to the public in 1609 by Federico Borromeo. When it was built, it simply consisted of the current Federation Hall and other halls, following the same line. Halls which were dedicated to the Academy of Design and the Academy of Painting. It was a narrow edifice, commissioned by the Cardinal to three important Milanese architects of that period: Francesco Maria Ricchini, Lelio Buzzi and Fabio Mingoni. An edifice quite narrow, placed next to two historical churches in the center of Milan. San Sepolcro Church, rising right on the Forum, back then the Mediolanum center of the 4th century Milan, and the Dominican Church, Santa Maria della Rosa, situated in the square with the same name, on the opposite side of Piazza di San Sepolcro, where today we can still see the original front door of the library. The first part in the history of the edifice meets a turning point around 1810, when the Ambrosiana Library acquires also the places held by the Oblates. Places initially not used, but important because they will later allow the successive development of the entire building. Another important moment in the evolution of the edifice occurs between 1829 and 1836, when two architects, Angelo Sant'Agostino and Giacomo Moraglia, build a new edifice which rises in Piazza della Rosa, following the demolition of Santa Maria della Rosa Church, a neoclassical edifice with a new entrance in the Ambrosiana Library. This new neoclassical edifice not only allows an enlargement of the library building, but above all, raises also another floor, allowing more space for the Works of Art Collection Gallery of Federico Borromeo, and for other works of art, which will be acquired later. The art gallery becomes therefore independent from the library and assumes the characteristics still available nowadays. Inside this new edifice, there was a remarkable courtyard, which in 1923, another important moment, was covered by a large curtain, becoming therefore a reading room. Nowadays, it is the current reading and meeting room, situated in the center of this new 19th century restoration. A further step in the enlargement of the edifice was in 1928, when the Ambrosiana acquired the church of San Sepolcro. At this point, 3 centuries after the library was established, the Ambrosiana complex included the entire block from San Sepolcro Square to the new Piazza Pio XI, former Piazza Santa Maria della Rosa. Another important moment was in the 1930s, when the prefect of Ambrosiana, Giovanni Galbiati, restored all the buildings which used to be the seat of the Oblates congregation, adding therefore fanciful halls to the art gallery and renewing the architectural style. We are in these halls right now, halls which overlook the triple loggia of the internal courtyard, also known as Spiriti Magni. We must also remember the important restoration of Ambrosiana between 1990 and 1997. The restoration efforts gave back in its integrity the Ambrosiana Art Gallery and Library to the citizens of Milan, and, I would say, to the entire world.
At the origins of the Ambrosiana Library, Art Gallery and Academy stands the remarkable figure of our Cardinal Archbishop, Federico Borromeo, the cousin of the great Carlo. Being in Rome, Federico had the idea of opening a library for the Milanese community. Because until then, the libraries had only been attended by scholars and college students, his intention was to make book heritage accessible to everyone who could read and write. Therefore, since 1609, our institution has been open to everyone interested in culture. The Great Lombarda Library was inaugurated on December the 8th, 1609. Cardinal Borromeo collected a large number of manuscripts written in Greek, Vulgar Latin and various Oriental languages for his library, because the name of the patron saint of Milan was Ambrosiana. Thanks to the great collection and the number and value of manuscripts, the Ambrosiana is undoubtedly the world's greatest Italian library. Among the famous librarians, we can mention Ludovico Antonio Muratori, Angelo Mai, and Achille Ratti, who later became Pope Pius XI.
Here we are in the center of the library, in the reading room, the place where every day scholars from around the world gather to consult manuscripts, old prints, precious texts, and books that are kept here. The reading room is equipped with special book rests, electronic instruments, and everything that might be necessary for consultation and study. It is a place where normally silence is required, because the scholars need to focus on consulting the books and manuscripts to be able to hear the voice of the past, of the ancient pundits and scholars who elaborated the catalogues, which provide accurate indications on how to study these texts, and why not, also how to discover what was not revealed until now by these rich and old writings. The catalogues, of course, had a very different aspect in the 1600s and 1700s, when they were completely handwritten, thanks to the study and care of these scholars. Later, a paper catalogue was created, consisting of small cards and notepapers, to allow the identification of many books, manuscripts and prints which are kept here. Today, the library provides digital catalogues. These catalogues are created gradually by the staff of the library, following the international standards, allowing you to know which books are kept here and their main characteristics, not only in Italian, but also in English. However, listing the catalogues nowadays has met completely new instruments. Digitization. Digitization allows you to have images and information using information, digital and electronic channels. Today we proceed according to scientific criteria and fulfill two important functions: to allow those who are far away to have access to the images they are interested in, and also to make available the most fragile materials, which cannot be moved and must be preserved. A few years after the Ambrosiana Library was inaugurated, Cardinal Federico had the great idea of honoring this institution with his own art gallery. This was the foundation of the Ambrosiana Art Gallery around 1618 to 1620. The art gallery was not just a storage or an exhibition area for paintings, because the Cardinal's intention was to establish a school, an art school. Among the masterpieces, our art gallery has offered the public famous works of art such as, for example, a Botticelli, the so-called Madonna of the Pavilion, or the Basket of Fruit by Caravaggio, the Flemings,
the great cartoon of Raffaello representing the School of Athens, the preparatory drawing of the fresco painted in the Vatican chambers. Designed in 1607 and established in 1618, the art gallery was intended to be the model of a future Academy of Fine Arts for the education of aesthetics. The Academy was in fact established in 1621, and its first president was the artist Giovan Battista Crespi, called Cerano. The new institution prospered in the early years, but went into decline until 1776, when it was moved to Brera. However, the art gallery remained and continually prospered, including the works of Raffaello, Leonardo, Tiziano, Caravaggio, and Bruegel, the best pieces of the entire collection, which still exist today. Presently, there are more than 1,500 works of art on wood, canvas and copper.
In 1618, Cardinal Federico Borromeo decided to donate his painting collection to the Ambrosiana Library, establishing the Ambrosiana Art Gallery. This is the oldest museum of the city. The collection of Federico Borromeo included very interesting paintings by Tiziano, Caravaggio, Bruegel, and many other famous painters. And in fact, his friendship with Jan Bruegel the Elder was very important for our collection. The friendship became a real relationship of client-painter, because along the decades, the Cardinal commissioned many works of art to this artist, thanks to his congeniality regarding his own theological and pictorial beliefs. Between 1608 and 1621, the Cardinal received from Bruegel 4 works of art named the Four Elements. The first one is the allegory of fire, followed by the allegory of water, the allegory of earth, and the allegory of air. The 4 elements which form the basis of the entire creation are illustrated in the most exquisite manner. It is obvious that Jan Bruegel is a miniaturist. All the objects, animals, fish, birds, and plants, are not the result of imagination, but are the reflection of reality. The love for nature is also illustrated in another painting kept in this room, commissioned again by Federico Borromeo, representing one of the first flower vases in the history of art. Obviously, it's a vase with imaginary flowers, because it brings together more than 100 species of flowers. And also imaginary because, as you can easily notice, the vase cannot hold a bouquet so large. Therefore, this is also a mix between reality and fantasy, between the veracity of nature and imagination. The Cardinal said that this painting is a real exercise for painters because it combines 3 genres of painting: a sacred scene, a court scene, and a beautiful landscape. The frame of the painting is very interesting because it has characteristics which can help us understand for whom the painting was executed. We can see arches, arrows, and half-moons, which are the symbols of the goddess Diana. Also, we notice the letters HD in the 4 corners of the frame. H for Henry, Henry King of France, and D for Diane de Poitiers, his mistress. The frame was commissioned by Cardinal Ippolito d'Este for the King of France, Henry II, but it was never sent to France because the king died. It was acquired by Carlo Borromeo, who gave it to the Ospedale Maggiore, and after that was bought by Federico Borromeo. Tiziano was a painter beloved by the Cardinal, who was very excited not only about his pictorial abilities, but also about his capacity to express the spiritual feelings very dear to Cardinal Federico Borromeo. This Magdalene is an early work of Tiziano, very appreciated by Federico Borromeo, present in the museum since 1625. In fact, the Cardinal noticed that the representation is rather bold, and as a consequence, Tiziano changed his manner of portraying Magdalene, illustrating her more chastely. But still, the Archbishop underlined the greatness of Tiziano, consisting in the fact that although the Magdalene is nude, she is painted in a manner which makes the eye to be immediately attracted by her eyes, and not her nudity. You can notice the deep look of the saint, penitent and contemplative, defined in iconographic language, according to the Gospel, by the little vase containing perfume. Thanks to the delicacy of the saint and her contemplative look, combining great technique and skill of execution, and the capacity of expressing the innermost human emotions, this painting met the aesthetic taste of Federico Borromeo. This painting by Federico Barocci is very important for our collection. You may notice a slight difference in the caption. In fact, while all the other paintings are donated by Federico Borromeo, 1618, this one is bequeathed by Federico Borromeo, 1631. It means that this painting was not donated by the Cardinal, along with the others when he established the art gallery in 1618, but it was donated after his death. He wrote that, "This is the dearest thing I have." This is a painting commissioned by the Cardinal from Federico Barocci after seeing the same subject already painted by the artist. Being fascinated by that work of art, he wanted a replica to keep in his cabinet. If we observe the shadows carefully, we realize that the only light is reflected by the face of the child, illuminating the whole painting. In the apocryphal Gospel of the pseudo-Matthew, the shepherds who entered the stable where Jesus was born saw that the entire place was illuminated by the splendor of his face. The death of Federico Borromeo did not end the collection of the Ambrosiana art gallery. In fact, it grew over the centuries with magnificent works of art, such as this one by Botticelli. This is the famous Madonna of the Pavilion, described by Vasari in the lives of the most eminent painters, sculptors and architects as a picciol tondo, with figures tiny but very gracefully and beautifully composed. This painting by Botticelli was included in the collection of the Ambrosiana art gallery in the 19th century. Another important work of art is this splendid painting by Bartolomeo Suardi called Bramantino. It is a fascinating painting, like all the other works of this artist of absolute genius. What does it represent? Some figures are recognizable in a very precise manner. On the left is St. Ambrose, recognizable by the mitre and whip placed on the throne. On the right is St. Michael the Archangel, recognizable by the great wings, the sword resting on the step, the scales placed on the throne, and holding in his hands the animula, the soul of the deceased, which was weighed and found not wanting. Definitely one of the most prestigious and fascinating works of art kept by the Ambrosiana Library is the original cartoon of the School of Athens by Raffaello. This work of art was included in the collection of the Ambrosiana in 1610, when it was only lent. It belonged, in fact, to a relative of Federico Borromeo, who, not having enough space in his home, asked the Cardinal to host the cartoon, which remained in the Ambrosiana until 1626, when the relative died and his widow sold it to the Cardinal for 600 imperial lire. Since then, the work of art has belonged to the Ambrosiana. Although it is known as the School of Athens, the original title given by Raffaello, visible in the rib vault above the Stanza della Segnatura in Rome, is philosophy. Philosophy is interpreted as the human ability to reason, a gift of the Creator from God. And thanks to this capacity, man is able to embrace the divine revelation. This, indeed, is the reason why philosophy stands in front of theology in the stanza della segnatura. Philosophy, as the knowledge of human matters, makes us able to embrace theology, the knowledge of the revealed divine matters. The presence of the cartoon of Raffaello in the collection is very important, and certainly for Federico was a crucial acquisition, because he believed that there was no other painter besides Raffaello who could express anew the sublimity of ancient art. Although it is very old, this is one of the most beautiful rooms of the Ambrosiana library. We are in a part of an edifice built in the 15th century. In particular, this was an oratory, as you can see from the large fresco behind me. It was the seat of the Luogo Pio di Santa Corona, the holy place of the Sacred Crown. The 12 men wearing black kneeling before Christ, 6 on one side and 6 on the other, are the 12 of Santa Corona. They were members of the highest and wealthiest Milanese nobility, and they were very important because they came here to venerate the relic of the Holy Thorn, but above all, they donated daily a large sum of money to pay for medicines for the poor. Santa Corona was very important for the city of Milan, especially for this charitable purpose. We know that Leonardo took part in some meetings of the Santa Corona, apparently, and therefore moved in these circles. We have a drawing by Leonardo of the church of San Sepolcro, right next door. This is the proof of his presence in these places. The fresco by Bernardino Luini is a representation of the crown of thorns worn by Jesus, because here the holy thorn was venerated. The recurring subject is precisely the crown of thorns. Christ, even in his suffering, is illustrated as a king. The word written above in capital letters is glory. In the trilogy of John, the suffering Christ is not overwhelmed, but is the Christ who willingly sacrifices himself in all his greatness for the salvation of humanity. One of the most famous acquisitions of Cardinal Federico Borromeo is definitely the basket of fruit by Caravaggio. We do not have precise information, but we know that the painting became part of Federico's collection during his lifetime. Sometimes we like to imagine that the Cardinal himself bought it directly from Caravaggio. Actually, this might not be impossible, as Cardinal Federico Borromeo was a close friend of Cardinal del Monte, the early patron of Caravaggio. The meeting, therefore, was not theoretically impossible. Also, the subject of the painting is typical for the Cardinal: nature. The basket is the only still life by the great artist. Federico describes the painting in his book, The Museum, and the text also says that he had long sought for such a work of art, but was never able to find it.
When it comes to the Ambrosiana Academy, it is slightly complicated. We have seen that since the beginning there has been an academy here, but it was seen as a school of art. Today it has 8 classes of research and represents the vastness of interests cultivated by this library today. Located in the center of Milan and Europe, the Ambrosiana Academy is the latest heir to Federico Borromeo's visionary project. It was, in fact, officially established in 2008. Coordinated by the College of Doctors, it aims to make the Ambrosiana a place dedicated to promoting contact and dialogue between cultures. The academics, successful scholars and promising researchers study, preserve and promote the rich heritage of the institution through conferences, so-called dies academici, publications and exchanges, aiming to create an international scientific community.
The Ambrosiana Academy has about 300 scholars from universities and study centers worldwide. These scholars attend periodic meetings, at least once a year, in 8 international conferences called Dies Academici, under the patronage of the main Lombard and Northern Italy universities, also recognized as an academic credit for those who attend them. The Academy promotes today, through its 8 classes, studies on the Far East, Japan, China, and India. It promotes studies on the Near East in 4 sections: Arab, Armenian, Hebrew, and Ancient Syriac. Another significant class, divided in 3 sections, promotes African studies, and the most recent one, established in 2014 by Cardinal Scola, consists of sections in Berberistic, Coptology, and Ethiopian studies. In addition, it also promotes the studies on Central African culture. The class of Greek and Latin studies is the heir of the ancient classical tradition, on which the Ambrosiana was established, as a custodian of tens of thousands of Latin and Greek manuscripts. Another class cultivates the Italian studies, and other 2 classes follow the patristic studies of Ambrosiana, especially of Sant'Ambrogio, and historical studies, particularly of San Carlo Borromeo and the Borromeo age of modern history. And finally, the class of Slavic studies, focused on the wide Slavic area of Europe and Central Asia. Also, particular studies are dedicated to the cultures of Central Asia, such as Kazakhstan, Korean culture, and even to other sections of minor research studies. Generally, the activity of the Ambrosiana consists of a series of 8 volumes. Among this series of publications, each year at least 8 volumes are issued, plus a series of sources and studies of collected monographs.
Among the priceless works of cultural heritage preserved by the Ambrosiana Library and Art Gallery, we must mention the so-called Codex Atlanticus by Leonardo da Vinci. A heritage consisting of 1,119 pages for a total of more than 2,000 drawings. The Codex Atlanticus is the largest collection of drawings and handwritten pages by Leonardo da Vinci in the world, and since 1637 has been kept in the Ambrosiana Library. It consists of 1,119 pages, illustrating the intellectual life of Leonardo for a period of over 40 years, from 1478 to 1519, focusing on different subjects. From sketches and preparatory drawings for paintings to mathematical, astronomical and optical research. From philosophical meditations, fables and food recipes up to curious and futuristic projects of gadgets such as hydraulic pumps, parachutes and war machines.
The Codex Atlanticus, preserved by the Ambrosiana Library, is the largest collection of handwritten pages by Leonardo da Vinci that exists in the world. These 1,119 pages illustrate chronologically the period between 1478, when Leonardo was still in Tuscany, and 1519, the year when he died in Amboise, France. The history of Codex Atlanticus is adventurous and practically starts with the will of Leonardo da Vinci, who leaves all his manuscripts to his beloved disciple Francesco Melzi, the son of one of the noblest Milanese families. But while Francesco Melzi keeps with a religious devotion this treasure representing the manuscripts of his master, his heirs are not interested. And since that moment begins a painful loss of these manuscripts. They were partly sold and stolen until a remarkable part of these manuscripts was taken into possession by Pompeo Leoni, son of Leone Leoni, the architect of Filippo II of Spain. Using glue and scissors, Pompeo Leoni fixes each page of the manuscripts of Leonardo. They had different sizes, and all of them were broken up into sections, as we can see in the exhibition of this room. He glued them on large paper sheets, and if the pages of Leonardo were written on both sides, using the scissors he cut a window in the support sheet, basically creating a type of passe-partout. And so the Codex Atlanticus got the appearance we know today. 1,119 large pages preserving inside a precious treasure, the manuscripts of Leonardo da Vinci. We notice that for convenience, Pompeo Leoni used large paper sheets, popular around the 1600s. Sheets used to manufacture atlases, from which the name Codex Atlanticus derives. Paradoxically, despite the fascinating origin of the name, the title mentions nothing about the kaleidoscopic content of Leonardo's pages. But the history of the Codex Atlanticus is not yet complete, because after being fixed by Pompeo Leoni, it is brought to Spain, to the king. However, it is brought back to Italy when an heir of Pompeo Leoni sells it for 300 dinars to Count Galeazzo Arconati, one of the best representatives of the Milanese aristocracy, related to Federico Borromeo, the founder of the Ambrosiana library, and also the executor of his will. To make sure this great treasure will not be lost and taken away from Milan, Galeazzo Arconati donates it in 1637 to the Ambrosiana library. And since then, the Codex of Leonardo da Vinci has been a piece of the collection desired by Federico Borromeo to be kept in this institution. And yet, the history of the Codex, rather adventurous and almost fictional, is not over, because in 1796, the Napoleonic troops enter Milan, and a commissioner presents at the gates of the Ambrosiana library a list of cultural objects to be confiscated. On this list, there is also the Codex Atlanticus by Leonardo da Vinci, which is taken to Paris and will remain there until 1815, when the Congress of Vienna will give it back to the Ambrosiana Library in Milan, and therefore back to the world. The last part in the history of Codex Atlanticus is recent, because in 2009 it was broken up into sections. Each page was released from its cage and bound in 11 volumes. So, starting that year, each volume was exhibited in this room, the best pages of Codex Atlanticus. Therefore, the general public, not just the scholars, could see this amazing and great work that reveals to us the genius of Da Vinci.
We are in the vault of the Ambrosiana library, the place where the most precious manuscripts and codices are kept. It is a high-security place, air-conditioned and stabilized, so that all the objects kept here are maintained in the best condition. The purpose of a vault is to store the most precious objects, considering that during World War II we could only bring the most important codices to the vault of Casa di Risparmio to be saved from the bombing, which also hit the Ambrosiana library in August 1943, fortunately without causing severe damage. Therefore, during the renovations between the years 1980 and 1990, it was obvious that there was the necessity to build a vault here with the same safety features as a bank vault, allowing us to preserve valuable objects regarding their age, uniqueness and particularities in the best conditions. As you can see, this vault is fireproof and does not allow any fire to spread. And besides this, the most valuable works are kept in special boxes, which allow an optimal preservation and maintenance according to humidity and safety standards. Besides this, the vault has independent air conditioning, so even if the air conditioning system of the library is blocked, inside the vault, the constant temperature and humidity, as well as the thermal inertia, are still maintained. For example, in the case of an explosion or a blackout which hits the entire city, the best temperature and humidity conditions are maintained here for the maximum possible time. In the basement, we have service areas, many rooms where we keep books and manuscripts. But, as you can see, at the same time, we also store works of art here. In this case, pieces of lime and plaster, antique sculptures used by students of the Design, Painting and Sculpture Academy, which Federico Borromeo wanted to have, together with the art gallery and the library. Here we keep our book collections, consisting of almost 1 million printed books and at least tens of thousands of manuscripts, a heritage that began with the inauguration of the library in 1609 by Federico Borromeo and that has increased significantly over the following centuries. We are now underground, under Piazza Pio XI. During ancient time, the Roman Forum of Milan covered the entire area between Via Orefici and Piazza San Sepolcro. In Roman cities, the Forum was the main square, where acts of justice and business activities were carried out, where the temples were located, and the patrons of the city spent their time. Milan also had its forum, a forum established during the 1st century after Christ, which was very important when Milan became one of the imperial residences and the seat of the court. Here we have a piece of pavement belonging to the northwest part of the Roman Forum. And here, for example, we can see that at the end of the square there was a drain for the rainwater. And next to it, the steps leading to the public buildings surrounding the square. These stones are particularly important and exciting to observe because they are the proof of a great history. Suffice it to say that in 313, Constantine issued in Milan the edict which ended the persecution of Christians, so he definitely stepped on these stones. Decades later, we had the Emperor Teodosio here, with his sons Arcadio and Honorio. Then we had Ambrogio, Bishop of Milan, Agostino as rhetorician, and for sure he made some speeches in the Forum. And then today, in the basement of the Ambrosiana library, we have a perfect link between the history of ancient Milan, imperial Milan, the Milan of the early church, the humanistic Milan, the Milan of Federico Borromeo's culture, and the current Milan that could discover and appreciate this treasure. The Church of Santo Sepolcro was built in the first half of the year 1000 by a silversmith family, the Rozzonis, who wanted a place to bury their relatives and loved ones. This church was therefore first designed as a crypt. But the church suffered a major change when, after 1099, at the end of the First Crusade and the return of the Crusaders to Milan, it was consecrated to the Holy Sepulchre. This is the uniqueness of this church. In the crypt, it has a replica of the Holy Sepulchre, the way it was seen and described by the Crusaders during their first stay in Jerusalem. This church was beloved by Carlo Borromeo, who saw it as almost the holy mountain of Milan. And this explains the two groups of statues made of wood, plaster and gypsum, reproducing on a scale slightly larger than natural the most important moments in the life of Christ. Currently, we have the Conviction, the patient suffering Christ, and Peter's denial. While on the other side, we have the washing of the feet before the Last Supper. We know that there once was a Golgotha with the crucifixion, but around 1700 it was replaced by the altar of the resurrection. Today, this church is used by the priests who live in the Ambrosiana library, the scholars, and it has rediscovered its own importance. In fact, this church has experienced the most important moments in the history of Milan. For example, the struggle between the secular clergy and the Patarines, with Saint Arialdo, who took refuge in this church when he was chased. We also think about the devotion of Carlo Borromeo to this church. He had a place, a small room in the upper part of the edifice, where he often retired to pray. Also, the funeral of Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, the founder of Futurism, was held here, where he was converted to faith near the end of his life. And above all, we consider this place, the Church of Santo Sepolcro, the replica of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, as the only other place where, from Good Friday until the evening of the Easter Vigil, a lamp is lit above the tomb of Christ, and the canons with the prelate begin their procession to take the light, as it is done in Jerusalem at the Holy Sepulchre, to the Duomo to light the Easter candles. Precisely for this reason, the Milanese medieval chroniclers considered Milan a unique city, because at its center, like in Jerusalem, there is the Holy Sepulchre of Christ. And in this place, we take care of the pilgrims the way it is done in Jerusalem, after they have faced a long and dangerous journey to see the sepulchre. This monumental sacristy is linked to the figure and work of Prefect Giovanni Galbiati. After 1929, when the parish of Santo Sepolcro was suppressed, the church was brought into use by the Ambrosiana library and its scholars. The prefect Galbiati wanted to gather in this church all the nights of the Holy Sepulchre. Therefore, the decorative aspect of the sacristy was inspired by this equestrian order and the Cross of Jerusalem. Today, the sacristy is used as a meeting or a conference room, but also simply as a place to visit for the beauty and austerity of its structure. It is also a part of the cathedral, used for meetings and prayers. Occasionally, it is open to those who want to attend a business or cultural event in our library.
all'interno della nostra biblioteca.
St. Carlo loved this place so much, especially this crypt, so a painting of him praying, even if it was completed after his death, reflects the historical truth. St. Carlo loved this place because here he could find the perfect replica of the sepulchre of Christ, the way it was seen by the first Crusaders, and for him, this was the place to meditate on the passion, death, and resurrection of our Lord. He meditated over these matters during most of his days and nights of prayer. The crypt, as we see it today, needs to be renovated and restored. Particularly, we remember that in this crypt, following the intention of St. Carlo to offer almost a spectaculum where we can empathize with the life of Christ, there are also beautiful statues representing the dead Christ, the Madonna of Sorrows holding Christ in her arms, and the other pious women weeping over the death of Christ.
La morte di Cristo.
A library is important not only for the reading room, the scholars who gather inside, and the qualified personnel who assist the scholars. A library is important also for the stored archives. Those places, of course, which are not accessible to users, but only to internal personnel. Those places that help us to preserve the objects. The Ambrosiana has many rooms that allow us to preserve almost 1 million printed books, and even special rooms for keeping its 36,000 manuscripts. In these rooms, we are able to maintain a particular temperature and humidity appropriate to preserve centuries of books stored here. When Cardinal Federico Borromeo inaugurated the library in 1609, he did not offer just a theological and religious library. On the contrary, it was a library which offered all the materials, contents, and languages. Cardinal Federico Borromeo was interested and passionate, especially about Oriental languages. The languages which promoted the Bible and the knowledge of the Church in the early centuries and the centuries to come. And that was how Ambrosiana began to acquire back then and continue to own over time important objects and collections of books written in Oriental languages. Among the Syriac and Hebrew language stand out the Arabic manuscripts. Even during the time of Federico Borromeo, at the beginning of the 1600s, there were a large number of manuscripts written in that language. But some important acquisitions were made during the time of Antonio Maria Ceriani, the end of the 1800s. He died in 1907. Antonio Maria Ceriani was an important scholar who studied Syriac language but favored the acquisition of Arabic works, joined by a young scholar, Don Achille Ratti. Later, Monsignor Achille Ratti, the prefect of Ambrosiana, very popular because he later became Pope Pius XI. Well, thanks to the efforts of Achille Ratti, we acquired an important collection of Arabic manuscripts. These manuscripts contain philosophy and medical texts, as well as Jewish mystic texts. These texts are constantly consulted by scholars even today and have been recently catalogued. There are almost 4,000 manuscripts written in Arabic, gathered in 4 mighty volumes, progressively catalogued in digital format. Today, scholars, even from a distance, are able to access these antique pages using modern means.
These two pages of Codex Atlanticus were originally connected with each other. As you can see, Leonardo drew a kind of canal along which these two machines are digging. These drawings were made in the early years of Leonardo, when he was in Tuscany and was designing the machines for digging the water canals of the Arno. With these two machines, Leonardo wanted to optimize the digging of the canals. You can see clearly that the first one has a big wheel, rotated from the inside by men, being possible to pass through the rotation of the wheel and operate these arms, which are carrying the soil from the canal, as we can see on the banks. The second one, however, is even more mechanized, because thanks to the rotation of these arms, we can see very well how the soil is carried on the upper bank of this canal. Therefore, we have these studies for optimizing work, studies with a civil characteristic. Browsing through the Codex, we find this other page, where we can see the project of a large siphon, precisely the problem of pumping the water in a tank. The siphon is operated by a bellows, which helps the water to be pumped in the tank, and then it flows out of it. This is interesting, because next to this study of hydraulics, we also find this sketch of optics. We can see this scholar designer near a board, while looking through a hole at a three-dimensional object, which is then drawn on this board located between the observer and the object to be drawn. The scholars call this study of Leonardo the study for the construction of a spectrograph. And we will now move on to another beautiful page with a set of hydraulic machines. Leonardo's problem was to be able to carry the water and store it in different tanks for using the hydropower. And so we have here a series of hydraulic devices. First of all, the so-called cochlea, or Archimedes screw, where we can notice that this screw carries the water to the tank located on the top, being operated by a disc which is rotated by water. Therefore, Leonardo studied the way of mechanizing the rotation of this screw. Then we find other devices. This one is for a well, rotated by a series of devices which carry the water from the bottom of the well and transport it to the surface. We notice this transporting tank made of leather, says the authentic note of Leonardo. And this allows the container to increase the amount of water. And then other devices, such as this beautiful wheel, drawn very well, operated by two devices with these spoons, which carry the water from the lower part of the tank and pour it in the upper part. It is known that in front of Duke Ludovico il Moro, Leonardo drew on this page the map of the city of Milan, the way it was looking back then, in a double version. First, the map, as we can see, presents the city of Milan as circular, still enclosed inside the circles of canals. You can see clearly the square, which indicates the castle of Porta Giovia, today Castello Sforzesco. But then, under the map, Leonardo also drew the center of Milan. We have a bird's-eye view here, and we can see the Porta Giovia castle with the corner towers. In the center, there is the dome, with the dome cladding, which was then under construction. And on the right, the beautiful, narrow bell tower belonging to the Church of San Gottardo, the Campanile del Pecorari. We conclude with the signature of Leonardo, because the Codex Atlanticus preserves a page which might not have a great value compared to other pages with beautiful drawings if we do not preserve the original signature of the master. I say master because Leonardo signs himself twice and writes before his name an abbreviation for master. First, Master Leonardo, and second, Master Leonardo Florentine in Milan. We notice that Leonardo wants to underline his origins, his training origins of Tuscany and Florence, but immediately adds Master in Milan because here, in Milan, he made a significant part of his beautiful drawings stored in this kaleidoscopic codex.
Caleidoscopico codice.
When in the early 1600s Cardinal Federico Borromeo became Bishop of Milan, he created the idea of the great Ambrosiana art gallery, academy and library, and even a planetarium. Unfortunately, he died before establishing it in 1631, the year after the plague illustrated by Manzoni in The Betrothed. Cardinal Federico Borromeo thought about a proper place, a location appropriate for his Ambrosiana. Therefore, he created proper rooms for his library. Among them here is what we call the Fragnani Hall, a room where we keep most of the 36,000 manuscripts. A room adorned not only with the paintings we see, but a hall which hosts the portraits of famous men, military men, men of the church, especially writers from the East and West who are looking down from above and watch over the work of the scholars. When it comes to books, you naturally think about their content, their words, phrases, and texts. This is the purpose of books, to send us the thoughts, the poetry, and the writings of the past. However, the books are not only this. The books are replete with illustrations and decorations. In the Ambrosiana library, among its 36,000 manuscripts, we can also find books which are precious for their decorations and illustrations. These books are usually known as books filled with miniatures. They are recognizable for their history, geographical origin, the historical moment when they were created, and for the person who commissioned them. Among the many manuscripts acquired by Federico Borromeo, there was a modest 12th century codex made of sheets of paper in southern Italy. Being preserved in a modern manner since then, it still keeps the comments about the Iliad, the famous masterpiece attributed to Homer. But besides the comments on the Iliad, this codex also contains 52 miniatures belonging to an older manuscript, a manuscript that dates back to the 5th century after Christ. This manuscript was written on parchment, not paper, and contains the miniatures which accompany the text of the Iliad by Homer. Cardinal Federico Borromeo had an extraordinary passion for Oriental languages, and he was aware of the value of culture, knowledge, and the wisdom hidden in these languages and texts. There is a special chapter we must consider regarding Oriental languages, such as Syriac, Armenian, Hebrew, Arabic, and that is the dissemination of the biblical and liturgical texts, and the texts belonging to the Fathers of the Church. Sometimes these languages are not included individually in popular texts, such as a gospel completely in Greek or Syriac. Sometimes we are surprised to find different languages gathered in a synoptic form. This is the case of this manuscript, which contains the text of St. Paul, the letters of St. Paul in 5 languages. That's why he is known in Ambrosiana as the quintilingual apostle. He is named the Apostle St. Paul, Apostle St. Paul, the quintilingual. We find, first of all, the Armenian language, then Arabic, and the Coptic language, the Syriac language, and finally, the Ethiopian language. But there is another surprise in store for us at the Ambrosiana Library. Rewritten parchments, containing writings which partially disappeared. The text of the Bible in Gothic language, a barbaric language spoken during the centuries after the so-called fall of the Western Roman Empire. Today, thanks to optical reading and the study of the specialists, it has returned. One of the most fascinating relics is the Homer of Petrarca. We cannot say precisely if it is Homer or the Iliad, because only the Iliad is contained here, owned by Francesco Petrarca in the 14th century. But we can imagine that Petrarca had a codex similar to this one, a codex created back then which has an unusually wide margin next to the Greek verses of Homer's poem. According to some scholars, the white part could have contained the Latin translation, because Francesco Petrarca did not speak Greek, a language which was not studied in Italy during his lifetime. That's why, in a famous letter, Petrarca wrote that his Homer remains silent because it communicates nothing. Or perhaps, as Petrarca wanted to humbly correct himself, his Greek Homer was not mute. It was he, Petrarca, that was deaf and could not understand a language that he had not studied.
Questi sono I nostri gioielli.
These are our jewels. Thanks to the support offered by the Cardinal Federico Foundation, the Ambrosiana Library and Art Gallery is now a benchmark of excellency famous worldwide. Under the guidance of fellows and scholars, it has been able to gather and preserve the legacy of the past to pass on in perfect condition to future generations.